Now, there are many different organizations that are coming out with different studies, and we talked about them in previous reports where people can't make ends meet. They don't have enough money to survive. The retail market is imploding on itself. Commercial real estate is going to be a disaster because there's so much open space. They're talking about the housing market. And there are additional studies that are coming out from different countries around the world. And one study, which is coming out of Australia, this study shows that 57% of Australia mortgage holders, they could not handle a $100 increase in their loan payment. Now, this additional $100 is equivalent to an interest rate rise of just 0.45%. And this is based on the national average mortgage of $360,000. And it's not just Australia. If interest rates rise, and we saw this back in 2007 going into 2008, and those people that have variable rate mortgages, well, it threw them completely out of whack and they couldn't make their payments anymore. Also, if the interest rates move up, guess what? Those people that are trying to purchase homes, well, they won't be able to purchase. So what we are seeing right now is that all these studies are coming out telling us how bad things are going to get. Now, we've been looking at this for quite a while. We know how bad they're going to get because the central bankers needed to keep the interest rates so low that no one would really realize what was really going on, because we're not in a normal market where interest rates are allowed to do what they normally do, and that is move up a little bit. The central bankers have been suppressing them on purpose because they know if they let them go up to 3, 4, 5, 6%, the whole system comes tumbling down. And this is why we are seeing these studies come out that the housing market, the student loan market, the automobile market, the retail market, the commercial business market, all of this is going to be in a huge amount of trouble when everything starts to fall apart. And you know the central banks will lose control of the interest rates and it will be a complete disaster. Now, we know the central banks have been looking at inflation and they keep telling us there's no inflation, don't worry about it. And when we look at this and we look at, wages and everything else, we realize that wages, they're stagnating. They're not moving anywhere. And in many instances, the wages are continually declining. Now, when we look at inflation and we look at wages, we see that these two things need to move up together. We can't have inflation while wages are going down. This is a complete and utter disaster. And what we're looking at right now is that wages are continually declining and inflation is continually moving up. Now, this just didn't happen. This has been happening for about 45 years. And if we go back in time, we can see that during this time period in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000, wages and salaries as a percent of GDP has been declining since the late 60s. Now, the government does benefit from inflation in certain ways. Incomes pushed higher by inflation push wage earners into higher tax brackets, and their higher incomes generate higher taxes. And this is why they would like to see inflation, but if wages are declining, this is not a very good scenario. Well, the private banking sector benefits from inflation as well. The lifeblood of banking profits is transaction and processing fees from issuing new credit. Since inflation enables households to buy more stuff with credit and service more debt, banks benefit immensely. Deflation, on the other hand, is kryptonite to bank profits. Households earning less every year are more likely to default on existing debt, and guess what? They can't take out new debt. So what we're seeing right now is the central banks, they don't know what to do because wages are continually declining. Why are they declining? Because we are losing the high-paying jobs. We are getting these part-time, low-paying jobs, and wages are declining. And they're trying to hold inflation down. This is the whole reason, because if they let inflation go up and wages are going in the opposite direction, it would be a complete and utter disaster. And this is why they've been shipping it off to other countries. This is why they've been putting into the stock market. This is why they've been putting into the housing market. They don't want people to notice any of this, because think about it. If they just let all the inflation hit the supermarkets, and all of a sudden bread was $12 for a loaf and milk was, say, $14, those people who are making their money today with 1, 2, 3 part-time jobs, they wouldn't be able to afford any of this. This would be a complete disaster on the entire economy. This is why they're continually telling us that inflation is going nowhere. Now, out in Spain, we understand the referendum is being held today, and right now the police, they're doing whatever they possibly can to stop people from voting, and they've been very nasty to the people. And we can see right now that 62%, they are looking to vote, and we see that there's about an 83% chance that they will vote yes. And we haven't had the final results come in, but we can see right now they definitely want to be separate and apart from Spain, and we can see that they don't want this to happen. And if Catalonia secedes from Spain in terms of debt sustainability, well, it looks like this is going to be Eurozone debt crisis 2.0, and we're going to be in for a very, very, very rough ride. And we know for a fact that Catalonia, this is really the wealth part of Spain. This is where a lot of the taxes are paid, and if this splits off, Spain is going to be in a lot of trouble. We see out in North Korea, things are heating up. Tillerson right now is saying that they have 3 channels of communication open to North Korea, and they're trying to talk to North Korea, but North Korea, of course, doesn't want to speak to the United States. Now, Kim Jong-un, he is not stupid. He understands that the deal has to come from both sides. Now, of course, Trump is out there saying that, listen, don't waste your time. Rocket Man, well, he doesn't want to speak, and this is a complete waste of time. Now, to me, this looks like Trump and Tillerson, they are playing good cop, bad cop, and it looks like Trump is pandering to the corporate media, keeping them off guard, saying that, yes, we don't want to talk to him, we don't want anything to do this, but we know in the background, Trump, Tillerson, they've been speaking to Xi Jinping of China. We know that China, Russia have been talking to Kim Jong-un. We know there are back channels, and they are speaking to Kim Jong-un, trying to work out some type of deal. Now, the deal might not be that North Korea get rid of their nuclear weapons. They might allow North Korea to keep their nuclear weapons, because they understand that North Korea is not going to stop until they get what they want, and that is a nuclear weapon that fits on a missile to protect themselves from regime change. Now, of course, the corporate media, they're continually out there trying to make us all believe that North Korea is going to be attacking, and this is going to be a problem here in the United States, because their missiles will be able to hit, Alaska, Chicago. I mean, they're just making stuff up here. But what we're seeing is that North Korea, they understand that they cannot trust the U.S. government, because they've seen what the government does. They understand what the cabal does in the end. I mean, look at what U.S. officials did to Libya. Gaddafi agreed to give up his nuclear weapon program in return for regime security. That turned out to be completely stupid. This was a really stupid move on Gaddafi's part. As soon as U.S. officials saw an opening, they pounced with regime change on the country. Today, Gaddafi is dead, and Libya is in perpetual crisis and turmoil. Look at what the U.S. officials are doing in Iran. They entered into a deal in which the U.S. government agreed to lift the sanctions on Iran if they agreed to this nuclear weapons program. And after the deal was reached and Iran had complied, U.S. officials broke their side of the deal by refusing to lift their sanctions on Iran. They actually placed more sanctions on Iran. Look what they did to Saddam Hussein out in Iraq. I mean, back then, Saddam Hussein was the U.S. government's loyal partner, and U.S. officials worked closely with him during the 1980s to kill Iranians. But when Saddam invaded Kuwait to settle an oil drilling dispute, U.S. officials went after him with a vengeance. And basically, invaded Iraq with weapons of mass destruction, which he did not have. They never found them. They didn't exist. Look at Syria, which for at a time served as a loyal partner and ally of the U.S. government. And there was a secret agreement to torture Canadian citizens Mohar Arar on behalf of U.S. officials and report their findings back to the CIA. Later, U.S. officials turned on Assad's ruler, Bashar al-Assad, in a regime change operation. And Kim Jong-un sees all this. He understands that the U.S. will break the promise. Look, the United States made a promise with Assad and Russia. If Assad gets rid of all the chemical weapons, they are fine with Assad. They're fine with what he's doing in his country. It's okay. But then they released the Islamic State. They then went into their country and invaded Syria. They then went in and they started working with the Kurds and splitting off Syria. They always go back on their word. And these countries out there, they realize that this happens every single time. Now, Russia and China, they are out there and saying that we oppose attempts to divide Syria. And it looks like China right now is saying absolutely not. Syria will not be split up by the United States, because we know that the United States, well, I'm sorry, really should say the cabal, they are pushing the agenda to split Syria, split Iraq, and have a Kurd nation, a Alawite nation, a Shia nation, a Sunni nation. And this was all planned a long time ago. And Russia and China are saying absolutely not. This is not going to happen. Now, we understand that the cabal will be getting very, very desperate because things are rapidly falling apart. There's this back channel with Kim Jong-un that Tillerson is reporting on, even though Trump is out there saying the opposite. But we know that this is basically all a put on for the corporate media, for the cabal, as they work to negotiate with China and Russia and to bring this whole crisis to a close. And the cabal is not going to sit back and let this happen. We're already seeing reports right now, and this is coming from the former head of GCHQ, says that North Korea is targeting the British financial sector to fund its nuclear ambitions. And they're saying that North Korean hackers, they're going to hack into the financial sector and maybe bring it down or steal as much as they possibly can to basically fund their operations. And we can see that this is the propaganda leading into what they're eventually going to do. And we know from Janet Napolitano and many others saying that, listen, it's not a matter of if, but when the financial sector is hit from a cyber attack. And they've been using the idea, since Sony Pictures were hacked by North Korea, which that never really happened, they're going to be using this propaganda to convince the people that North Korea has the ability and they're ready to do this. And we can see already that they're out there trying to convince everyone that they are hacking into the financial sector in the UK, that they have the ability to go in and manipulate the transactions to steal whatever they need, and they're going to continually blow this out of proportion and say that they are hitting the United States, they're hitting the UK, they're hitting many other areas, because what they need to do is they need to explain away why the economy, the global economy, is failing. And they need an enemy. They need someone to blame all of this for. And it looks like this is what they are building up to do. And Mr. Hannigan said North Korea is set to become a Premier League player in cyber warfare as it's targeting Britain's financial sector. So right there and then, we can see already what they're trying to do, and they're going to be pushing this as hard as they possibly can to make people believe that if, or I should say when, the system comes down, we know where it's coming from, because we're coming up to the point where this system cannot continue on. I mean, we're seeing the housing market, not just here in the United States, in Canada, out in the UK, Australia. The whole thing is going to fall apart. The central banks can only do so much. The real market is going to take hold, and things are going to start to really move in the opposite direction. We're already seeing it because they can't control everything. They can control certain manipulated statistics. They can control the stock market, but everyday people they can't control. They can't control their jobs. They can't control how much they make. They can't control how much they spend. They can try to push them to do these things, but when people aren't making the money, when people aren't getting the jobs, guess what? They're just not going to do it. And this is where it all falls apart. And this is what we are seeing right now. We are living it right now. You can see it happening right in front of our face. And as we move throughout this holiday season and further into next year, it's just going to accelerate. And there's going to become a certain point where the whole thing breaks down. And this is why they're preparing and getting ready to explain away why all this is happening. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe.